In this video, we are going to be learning all about intervals. And the reason intervals are so important is because they are essentially the building blocks that make up harmony and chords. Now, whether you know the basics of music theory or not, this lesson will give you a complete understanding of intervals and how they work. So let's get into it. So an interval is just a distance from one note to another, and we need some way to measure this distance of notes, right? And so we do this with something called semitones or half steps. And they can be used interchangeably, it doesn't really matter. And this is essentially just the distance of one fret. So for example, if I were to play this G note right here, moving up one fret to this G sharp note right here, that would be moving up one semitone or a half step. We can do the same thing if we go a further distance. So if we go from this G note to this A note, we've moved up 2 frets or 2 semitones or 2 half steps. Like I said, they can all be used interchangeably. So there are a total of 12 intervals. And an easy way to illustrate this is if we just take all the notes on the low E string of our guitar, right? So let's say this is 0, right? Because we're not fretting anything. Well, we go up 1 fret, right? That's a distance of 1 semitone, 2 semitones, 3 semitones, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And when we arrive on the 12th fret, we have completed a whole octave. So that means that we've gone all the way from an E note to another E note, a whole octave above. So every other distance, so from 0 to 11, from 0 to 10, from 0 to 9, etc., all of those are individual intervals and they all have names. Now you might think that the names for each of these intervals comes from how many semitones we traveled, right? So you would think, okay, well, a third would be 3 frets. A fifth would be 5 frets. A seventh would be 7 frets. But that's not exactly what we do. We actually only go up to sevenths, and I'll explain why, and it's all gonna make sense after we go over all 12 intervals. So we need a root note to base all of these intervals off of, and we're gonna use this A note on the low E string on the 5th fret right here. So every interval we learn is going to be based on the root note right there. Now our first interval is a distance of 1 semitone or 1 fret, and that is going to be called a minor second. So from this, just right next door to that note there. Now, if I wanted to play these notes at the same time, I'd have to stretch very weird. And just for the sake of illustration, that's what it would sound like if they were played together. That's a minor second interval right there. Our next one is a distance of 2 semitones. That's going to be a major second. So, right, 2 frets. They're played together. That's a major second, just like that. Then the next one is a distance of 3 semitones. That's going to be a minor third to there, or this is a very important component of a standard minor chord. Then we've got a distance of 4 semitones, so from here to there, or that's a major third, an important component of a major chord. The next one, we've got a distance of 5 semitones, and that's going to put us at a perfect fourth, right there. Okay. The next interval is a distance of 6 semitones, and it is very dissonant sounding. This is called a tritone. Again, it's very dissonant sounding, right? But it can sound really cool in some chords. Then next up, we've got 7 semitones, and we arrive at a perfect fifth. This is a very important component of both major and minor chords and a whole bunch of other chords, and it's very stable sounding. Then we continue our way up. We get to 8 semitones, where we get a minor 6. Just like that. We can also move up another string to make it a little easier to play. That's a minor 6. Then next up, we've got 9 semitones. So now we've arrived at a major 6th. It sounds like this. Just like that. Sounds pretty cool. So major 6, 9 semitones. Then we've got 10 semitones. And that gives us a minor 7. Very important part of a minor 7 chord. Then we get to 11 semitones, which is a major 7th. which is a very important part of a major 7 chord. So when we get to 12, we arrive at our octave, right? So that note, we finally arrived, we've climbed all 12 notes all the way up to reach the same note that we've started on, just an octave above. By the way, if you're enjoying this lesson and you want to learn more about music theory and how it applies to the guitar, I have an ebook called The Guitarist's Companion where I cover a whole bunch of the most essential music theory concepts, and you can grab it totally free. It doesn't cost you any money. So I'll put a link to that at the top of the description if you want to check it out. So why is it that our numbering system stops at sevenths? Well, the reason is because in Western music, we divide everything into 7-note scales. Right? When we think of the major scale and the minor scale, which is basically how we get our keys and how all of our music fits together, well, those are 7-note scales. So I'm going to give you an example with a basic major scale, right? If we were to take an A major scale, so I'm going to play the 7-note scale starting on the A note, the same one that we were using for our intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then our last note is 8, which gives us an octave. And the oct prefix makes sense because that's 8. Now, I always talk about how important it is to number all of your notes in your major scale, and there's a bunch of reasons for this. But if we were to look at what the names of the intervals are from that starting note in our A major scale, well, you're going to see that it's going to give us those 7 numbers. So let's go to our root note. There's our A, our first note in our scale. Now, if I go up to the second note in the scale, which we call the 2 note, well, that is a major second, right? If I go up to the third note in the scale, well, that distance is a major third. If I go up to the fourth note in the scale, that's going to be a perfect fourth. If I go up to the fifth, that's going to be a perfect fifth. If I go up to the sixth, that's going to be a major 6. And if I go to the 7, that's going to be a major 7. And then we get our octave. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? The notes of the major scale are also intervals from that first note in that major scale. So that's why these intervals only go up to sevenths, because it fits very nicely into the way that we divide up music into our 7-note scales. And the same thing would happen if we did this all with a minor scale as well. So if I play an A minor scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, octave, right? The same as the 1. Well, those intervals would give me major second for my 2, minor third for my 3, perfect fourth for my 4, perfect fifth for my 5, minor 6 for my 6, minor 7 for my 7, and then we get our octave. Now there's one last thing that I want to talk about in this lesson, and that is 9s, 11s, and 13s. Because I think a lot of people think these are just further intervals, but what they are is actually pretty straightforward and simple, because we end when we get to sevenths, right? Well, what happens when we get to the 8th note in our scale? We get to an octave, and it is the same as 1, right? So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1 are the exact same note. That would mean that 9 and 2 are the exact same note. 10 and 3, 11 and 4, 12 and 5, 13 and 6. So that means that 9 is the exact same thing as a second, 11 is the same as a fourth, and 13 is the same as a sixth. Now, a lot of people assume that this just means we're playing that interval an extra octave up, right, to reach these higher numbers, but that is not always the case. Now, I don't want to get too deep into that here. I'm actually working on a lesson called How Guitar Chords Get Their Names. We're going to be covering all of this stuff in much greater detail. This lesson kind of serves as a little bit of a prologue or precursor to that one. So if this video has been out for a few weeks, then that chord lesson might be out. You might be able to go check that out. If not, I'd highly recommend going and checking out my video on essential music theory for guitar. I'm going to throw that up in the middle of the screen if you do want to check it out. Make sure you go grab my free music theory ebook. There'll be a link at the top of the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.